webcast is broadcasting the whispers that are being made. It makes for interesting reading. Okay. Okay. I am opening the Board of Pharmacy meeting for January 25th, right? 25th. So why don't we take a roll call? We'll start down here with the esteemed Mr. Weiser.
Thank you. Stan Weiser, professional member.
Victor Law, professional member.
Debbie Beal, professional member.
Greg Lippy, public member.
Lavanza Butler, professional member.
Alan Chad, professional member.
Ricardo Sanchez, public member.
And with that, we are going to move into closed session.
Okay, everybody leave.
Reconvening the Board of Pharmacy on January 25th. Thank you, everybody. The first thing we have to do is I understand we have a 50-year pharmacist here, Mr. Irv Sitkoff.
Come on up, Irv.
And Irv, you're so special that you actually have two of us coming up.
Well, I didn't expect this.
I'm supporting Irv.
I know this guy for a long time.
So come up and this you're
Okay. Can you hear? Okay, it's on.
So come back over here. Just back up a
Okay.
little bit.
You can-
And we can talk into this, and you're on the webcast, okay? So first off, just tell us a little bit about your profession, where you graduated from pharmacy school. Keep it clean. But,
Well, I could spend about 45 minutes, but
how about
I
5?
didn't prepare for it.
And no jokes.
No, the fellow yesterday told a joke.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're not doing a repeat of that, okay?
I'll say that. Yeah, I went to LACC, had no idea what I wanted to do. Took my pre-pharmacy there. In the meantime, USC went to the PharmD program and took, as I say, graduated in 2 years from City College and found that of all the things I thought I could be fit for would be a pharmacist.
And that was
And-
because,
I don't think I was fit. Well, I couldn't see that well. I wanted to be a pilot. That was my first dream. I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. I wanted to lay out, but I cannot draw a straight line, even with a ruler. And I did like science. I like people. And I felt that pharmacy would be the place for me to be. I got into SC, luckily, graduated in the first class of PharmDs. In fact, accelerated. We got in January of '54. And I've never thought that I could have done anything else. I would have failed any other profession. I feel that I accomplished what I wanted to do. I still want to accomplish. I'm still working.
good for you.
And, well, it's a wonderful profession.
I agree.
And we can do a lot of work for people, for science, for medicine, and help people's lives. And I'm over at pharmacy now 3 days a week and do clinical and work with patients. And one of the dreams that we've always had, when I first started, we couldn't even put the name of the drug on the label of the medication. Patients had no idea what they were using. We were using water, distilled water, with our ophthalmics. No sterility, no buffering. The poor people with glaucoma had pilocarpine unbuffered. We brought in the buffered solutions the first 2 years I was over in the pharmacy where I was working. And we started teaching the older pharmacists what it's all about. And I did break the law. I did consult with patients early, where we were told not to do it by the Board of Pharmacy.
Not me.
That was pre-Jenny, obviously.
That's right. But things have changed. And now our dreams, even in the pharmacy where I am, we have the EHR. We're able to look up physician records. We have direct contact with the physicians. We can discuss patients' therapy. We can change it. I'm having fun in my old age. And I really appreciate being in the profession that I've been in and bringing up my family and friends, and I'm just happy to be here.
Well, excellent. And I understand that you were also in UPNI.
Yeah, well, Irv been a board member of UPNI and has been instrumental in making our organization a success back in those days. And Earl also have been a long-standing member of CPHA, and he always volunteers his time and serve on the committees. So good luck to you, Irv.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm
Did you
going to
wanna
put
say-
in
Well,
one
I was
plug.
basically going to say the same thing. He said about how hard he works with CPHA and our local association. So, and I've, been able to see him in action. I have a lot of respect for him.
Well, we're doing something now. We're revitalizing the Los Angeles area with the South Bay Pharmacy Association, the Central LA Pharmacy Association, and Hollywood Wilshire. It's becoming a vital force. We have a dozen delegates going to the CPHA this coming year at the Western Exchange, and looking forward to keep on going. Thank
Excellent.
you.
So Irv, please clap. So Irv, we have only people who have been pharmacists for 50 years and been willing to come up here and talk about it get these very unique pens that recognize your service to pharmacy. And if I can put it on your lapel without sticking you, I will do so. We thank you very much for being a leader in pharmacy and for your 63 years of
Well,
service.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. So we also want to do pictures. You don't have any family members with you, do you? Here today? Some people bring hundreds of people, no. But for that, then you're
Want to be a
going to...
pharmacist?
But we'd like to have a picture taken.
Come on up, Warren.
Here.
Come on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we start our meeting, I'd like to do roll call since we actually did it once before, but there's nobody in the room. But so you know who the board members are and whether we're professional members or public members. So Ricardo, could I start with you?
I'm sorry.
We're doing roll call.
Oh, Ricardo Sanchez, public member.
Alan Shadd, professional member.
Albert Wong, professional member.
Lavanza Butler, professional member.
Greg Lippy, public member.
Debbie Veal, professional member.
Victor Law, professional member.
And Stan Weiser, professional member.
And our first agenda item is licensing committee, and I would like to hand this over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Stanley Weiser.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. It is a thrilling experience for me to be able to do a report while you're chairing the meeting, and so the opportunity is significant.
Oh, Stan's already.
I appreciate that, Mr. Weiser, and I look forward to your outstanding report.
Okay, here we go. So the first item that we discussed at our licensing committee was consideration of certification programs developed to satisfy the requirements of licensure as an APP pursuant to Title 16 California Code 1730.2. So since the passage of SB 493, Senator Hernandez, Chapter 469, the board has been working on implementation of various provisions, including developing regulations to establish the parameters for acceptable certification programs that can be used as one of the qualifications for licensure as an APP. More specifically, 1730.2 establishes the parameters for certification programs in general clinical pharmacy practice, and the regulation requires such a certificate program to meet the following. 1, recognition by an accreditation council of the pharmacy education as a continuing education, or the accreditation by the National Commission of Certifying Agencies. 2, to include specified learning objectives in at least 5 sequentially ordered educational modules covering specific topics. 3, include an assessment after completion of each of the educational modules to confirm the participants' understanding, knowledge, and application of the learning objective. 4, instruction and assessment is to be developed and provided by either an advanced practice pharmacist licensed by the board or an expert with experience in their respective areas of focus. 5, a final overall assessment is given, and 6, 10 hours of CE every 2 years. And a copy of this is as where it should be in attachment number 1. So the committee discussion was, we heard presentations from both CPHA, the California Pharmacists Association, on its advanced certification program, which was developed in conjunction with the National Association of Drugstore Chains. As part of the presentation, CPHA highlighted the elements of the certification program and how the program complies with with the regulations that we have set forth. The committee was advised that the program consists of 30 hours of online self-paced learning covering 5 modules, as well as 8 hours in-person skills seminar. The committee was advised that 30 participants have completed the initial program. And a copy of that program is in attachment number 1. Additionally, the committee also heard a presentation by the California Society of Health System Pharmacists that developed a program with Touro University. As part of the presentation, they also highlighted the elements of their certification program and how it complies with our regulations. The program offered by CHHP consists of 30 hours of online learning, which must be completed within a 6 to 8 week time frame, as well as 8 hours of in-person live event. And a copy of that program is also in attachment number 1. It's there for your convenience to review, and the committee has no need to approve these programs, but we certainly are always appreciative when organizations come and present them. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them. If not, I'm sure you've all had an opportunity to review the programs in your packet. And if there's no public question or input, I'll move on. So, Madam Vice President, I'm going to continue. Item number B on our agenda was discussion and consideration of possible revisions to licensure requirements for a designated rep in a reverse distributor, including but not limited to Business and Professional Code 4053. So B&P Code 4040.5 provides a definition for a reverse distributor, which to include every person who acts as an agent for pharmacies, drug wholesalers, third-party logistics providers, manufacturers, and other entities by receiving, inventorying, warehousing, and managing the disposition of outdated or non-saleable dangerous drugs. B&P Code 4043 provides a definition for a wholesaler as a person who sells for resale or negotiates the distribution or takes possession of any drug or device. Under this section, a reverse distributor is considered a wholesaler. Business and Professional Code 4053 provides the board with the authority to issue a license to a designated rep who shall be responsible to provide sufficient and qualified supervision in a wholesaler or a veterinary food animal drug retailer. The section also provides the application of requirement for such an individual. General requirements include minimum age, 18, high school grad, or the equivalent, 1 year paid work experience related to distribution or dispensing, hang on a second, good, of dangerous drugs or dangerous devices, and the eligibility to take the pharmacist, to take the pharmacist exam, and the completion of a training program covering specific content areas. B&P Code 4053.1 provides the board with the authority to issue a license to a designated rep who shall be responsible to provide sufficient and qualified supervision and a third-party logistic provider. Although similar, the training course requirements for a designated rep 3PL are not as comprehensive. So the background is, recently the board staff was contacted by a pharmaceutical waste company that is seeking an exemption to the designated rep requirement, as well as the requirement to have a designated rep in charge. Board staff is not aware of any provision that would provide the board with the ability to make such an exemption. However, staff notes that it may be appropriate to consider it if the general licensing requirements for a designated rep are appropriate for a business that solely handles dangerous drugs and pharmaceutical waste for destruction. Under federal law, states shall require personnel employed in wholesale distribution to have appropriate education and/or experience to assume responsibility for positions related to compliance with state licensing requirements. So the committee discussion, as part of its discussion, we, the committee, noted that by law, for a wholesaler to operate, it must have at least one designated rep or a pharmacist on the premises at all times when the wholesaler is open for business. A wholesaler must also have a designated rep in charge who shall be responsible for the wholesaler's compliance with state and federal laws governing wholesalers. The committee heard a presentation from Bob Shaw and Terry Shane, representing Medical Waste Services. The committee was advised that their company had received approval to dispose of pharmaceutical waste using a high heat technology that is more environmentally friendly than incineration. And as part of the company's approval process from various state and federal organizations, regulators, the company was advised that it must also be licensed by us as a reverse distributor, which is, by the way, a DEA requirement. The committee was advised of the challenges Medical Waste Services has in finding individuals that meet the licensing requirements as a designated rep because of the year of experience required. So the committee discussed the current licensing requirement for a reverse distributor, as well as the current licensing requirements for a designated rep that works in a reverse distributor and current impediments to meeting those requirements. The committee reviewed a draft proposal to establish separate licensing requirements for a designated rep working in a reverse distributor. So the recommendation from the committee, Madam Vice President, is that we pursue statutory changes to develop licensing requirements for a designated rep reverse distributor, including proposed addition of the Business and Professional Code 4022.6 and 4053.2, and proposed amendment to PC 4400, an amendment to the 1 year of experience requirement specified, specifically proposed section of 4053.2A1A. And having read and said all that, I'm going to ask Ann to go to attachment number 2 and review for us what the committee is suggesting that the board approve. Thank you, Ann.
Yeah, so what you have in attachment 2 is the last page of the attachment, or the last 2 pages of the attachment, is we are proposing essentially a new licensing category, and it would be for the designated representative reverse distributor. So the first section actually provides the definition of what that person would do. 4053.2 then establishes the requirements. They are very consistent with the requirements for licensure that the board uses for a designated representative as well as a designated representative 3PL, but in recognition of the type of business that they would be working in. The knowledge areas have been altered to more closely reflect the requirements for that type of a business organization. In addition, based on the committee's discussion, the 1 year of experience, which the presenters indicated was one of the impediments to licensure in general, we are allowing them to use their 1 year paid experience in that type of business environment, which is working in with drug disposal, essentially, for a year. So that is one of the pathways to licensure. And then just the change in 4400 is just the fee schedule to allow us to collect an application fee and renewal fee.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Question. So is a designated representative for wholesalers be allowed to work at the reverse distributor?
Yes.
Or vice versa?
No, so
Oh,
yes.
the other way around is not
right,
okay.
so the requirements for a designated representative in a wholesaler are more comprehensive. So a person that has that license can work in the other, but the converse is not true.
Okay, just want to clarify that. Okay.
So, Madam Vice President,
Yes.
the committee would propose that the board approve the proposed addition to 4022.6, the proposed addition to 4053.2, and the proposed amendment to 4400 with regard to the designated rep for a reverse distributor.
Second.
No,
Thank you.
Is there any public comment? Okay, seeing none, let's call for the vote.
Good.
All those in favor of the committee recommendation? Looks like it's unanimous.
Thank you, Board. So item number C, if I may continue, is the discussion and consideration of a statutory proposal to establish a satellite compounding pharmacy licensure category. So B&P 4029A provides the definition of a hospital pharmacy as a pharmacy licensed by the board located within any licensed hospital, institution, or establishment that maintains and operates organized facilities for the diagnosis, care, and treatment of human illness to which persons may be admitted for overnight stay. B&P code, am I okay here? Good. B&P code 4029A, 4029B also provides that a hospital pharmacy also includes a pharmacy that may be located outside of the hospital in another physical plant that is regulated under the hospital's consolidated license issued pursuant to Health and Safety Code 1250.8. This section continues to state that as a condition of licensure, the pharmacy in another physical plant shall provide pharmaceutical services only to registered hospital patients who are on the premises of the same physical plant in which the pharmacy is located, with an exemption being provided for a centralized hospital packaging pharmacy. B&P 4127.1 generally establishes the requirement for licensure for a pharmacy that compounds sterile drug products. As part of these requirements, 4127.1b provides that a license to compound sterile drug products shall be issued only to a location that is licensed as a pharmacy. So our discussion, we were advised that as the board implemented the expanded sterile compounding licensure program, both hospitals and board staff have experienced challenges in applying appropriate licensing requirements. That's probably an understatement. Part of the challenge results from the board's requirement that regulation, while considering the regulations, that a hospital must also comply under CDPH requirements. So in addition, some of these challenges board staff met internally as well as consulting with California Department of Public Health staff and council. The intent of these meetings was to gain a better understanding of the overlay between the two regulators, understand the expectations for patient care, as well as determine what changes, if any, staff should recommend to ensure safe and appropriate pharmaceutical services within a hospital. In addition, board staff was approached by a large health system that is seeking clarification on the board's authority to issue more than one hospital pharmacy license. This request was made noting that the California Department of Public Health hospital license includes more than just the physical hospital building, but also includes other approved services that may be located off the premises. The concern expressed was about both the logistics of the main hospital pharmacy providing medications in a safe and secure manner to such facilities that are located off-site, and if there was an opportunity to provide for a better drug control at some of these other locations. So as part of the discussion, the committee reviewed the proposed statutory changes designed to address some of these challenges, as well as create additional options for hospitals. The proposed changes include, I'll tell you. One, to allow a hospital to secure a second hospital pharmacy license from the board to be located within an approved service area that is not of the hospital's physical plant. And secondly, establishes the authority to issue a satellite sterile compounding pharmacy license to a location separate from the hospital's physical plant under specified conditions. So it's, I will ask Ann once again to review for 4029, 4127.15, and the amendments of such.
Sure. So the proposed changes to section 4029 include, the first one is in sub B, where we are removing the word consolidated. And the significance of that change is under current law, unless it's a consolidated license issued by CDPH, we can only issue a single hospital pharmacy. So removing that word creates the option and removes that impediment.
Is this in 4029?
Yes.
So when I look, I don't... Read below. That's existing law, and
The proposed language is behind it.
C.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
And then the second provision that we're including in there is to, under current law for the sterile by virtue of the fact that there will be sterile compounding, under our law, they need to have a pharmacy license there as well at the same location. And so some of these approved services that a hospital may perform, like an infusion center, may not be in the hospital itself. And so by law, we should not be issuing a sterile compounding license there because they don't have the underlying pharmacy license. So what C is designed to do is to allow for us to issue the sterile compounding license, that we're calling it a hospital satellite compounding license, to allow for the compounding to occur at that approved service, at that approved services location. Under 4127.5, then, what we're doing is establishing the application or the licensure requirements for that satellite compounding pharmacy, and they mirror the provisions that we have for a general sterile compounding pharmacy. So those are detailed there. It's including the policies and procedures and those kinds of things as well.
Stan, does that mean you agree or disagree with her?
One of the provisions that I will highlight with this is because this satellite compounding location is using the hospital's pharmacy as their underlying permit in this context, that everything needs to be centralized through the hospital permit, similar to how it would be in other pharmacies.
Thank you, Ann. So attachment number 3 has the sections cited. And the committee recommendation is to pursue statutory changes to approve the amended language in 4029 adding 4127.5 and securities changes by way of legislation. Madam Vice President, that's the committee's recommendation.
Is there any other board discussion?
Okay.
Victor?
So if you have a hospital building right here as a pharmacy, and then you have two other separate locations outside, but those two also could do sterile compounding. So do they need two separate licenses?
Yes, they would require separate licenses, and the only way that they can qualify for those two additional licenses is if they are included, those other locations are included under the hospital license issued by CDPH.
Okay.
So that's like a breast cancer center, like on the side, outside of the hospital. I see, okay.
If I remember right, it's for the people in that center.
Yes.
So we're not, the sterile compounding license would not be for that pharmacy to produce product to go back to the mothership. It's for people in that center. And so it's cancer, dialysis, kind of those unique situations.
And they have to pay a separate fee for those licenses?
Absolutely.
Yes, similar to a sterile compounding license, yes.
Got it.
Any other board comments or questions? Is there any comments from the public? Dr. Gray? Just make sure the microphone's on, please. Sounds good.
Good morning. Steve Gray from Kaiser Permanente. I really appreciate the board addressing this issue. It has been an area of ambiguity for quite a while, and this may be the answer. We'll see how it fares in the legislative process. But I do have a couple of questions, and I wasn't quite sure, Ann, what you meant by something you said, something has to be centralized. You used that word. So what activities then have to be centralized for these off-site places that have this separate license? What did you mean has to be centralized? Yeah, take your time. This is...
Yeah, make sure I don't see your red light on your mic. Thank you.
So if you look at the provisions in 4127.15,
Okay.
The satellite compounding pharmacy has certain provisions that they need to do. So if you look, they cannot compound sterile drug products they can compound, but only for products for administration only to registered hospital patients who are at that satellite location. And then the services need to be directly related to the services or treatment that is administered at that location. So they can't be doing other things other than what's required at that location. And then they need to, you need to have the policies and procedures. They need to complete a self-assessment form. We need to receive a list of all of the products compounded at that hospital.
At that location?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, my computer is frozen. They need to purchase, procure, or otherwise obtain all components through the license of the hospital pharmacy.
Okay. But not necessarily from the hospital pharmacy?
No, but it has to go through there. The ordering functions are done by the hospital pharmacy.
Okay. But they can be delivered directly from the wholesaler to that location?
I believe is currently constructed, yes.
Okay. Okay. And records only need to be kept at the satellite location?
I don't believe that we specify where the records need to be kept. I think that they could be kept at the hospital underlying permit or at the location.
Yeah, I mean, I think our intent would be to make it not burdensome. I mean, we'd want the records, but I think as long as and maybe I should let the executive officer speak instead of myself.
I think we need to kind of deliberate a little bit on how the records go. If we go ahead and move this as legislation, there'll be plenty of time to address some additional issues that will certainly come up as it goes through the process. The records is a good one, and I think we need to think about about it a little bit instead of just reach a solution. Because if you have multiple sites providing drugs, but a single place oh, sorry, I'm too far away for once. I can't hear my wisdom. Anyway, I think we need to think about it a little bit.
Okay.
Short answer. No reason to blather on.
And you kept talking about compounding. What if that off-site facility that is under the hospital license doesn't do any compounding? Do they still, does this still apply? I mean, how does that differentiate? Because you talked about if they're doing sterile compounding, obviously they need this HSP license and they need this sterile compounding license. But what if they don't do that? Do they get a separate HSP license?
So that's what the change in 4029B is designed to
Okay.
do, is to allow for the board to issue a second hospital license.
Okay. And you took out the word consolidated. Does that mean that this would apply? I don't understand why you took that out.
Because a consolidated license, according to CDPH, is when there are two physical hospitals. It's not the approved services, it's the two physical hospitals that are regulated under a single CDPH license.
Okay, so if you...
this is a hospital license under CDPH that has one physical hospital building, but then has approved services. That's not a consolidated license.
Okay, so if you had two hospitals that were under a consolidated license, and each one of those had these off-site surgery centers that were part of that hospital, then when you talk about the centralization and so forth, it's at the mother hospital. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, you would have two different hospitals, so they would be related to one of those two hospitals.
To one of those hospitals, but not necessarily to each other.
I do not believe that that's what the law requires.
Yeah, because you took away the consolidated license review. Okay. And you envision this license to be a license in that off-site facility that doesn't necessarily require a physical pharmacy, or does it require a physical pharmacy? In other words, if you have a surgery center that is under that hospital license, but the only drugs they use are by physicians and nurses in the surgery center, and they have no need for a pharmacist there, then do they still have to have a square footage that is designated as the pharmacy, or do they have this HSP license just gives them the ability to receive and maintain prescription drugs there?
If they are seeking a hospital license, a hospital pharmacy license from the board, they're going to need to comply with all of the requirements for a hospital pharmacy license.
Okay.
If they're seeking licensure as a satellite compounding, they need to satisfy all of the requirements for that license.
Okay, let's set aside the compounding, because I understand that. So I've got a surgery center that has no pharmacist, but they need a license so that they can receive drugs, order drugs, use drugs. Are you saying that they need to have some square footage that is designated as the hospital pharmacy that has separately its own bathroom or hot and cold running water, et cetera?
I'm saying that if someone is seeking licensure as a hospital pharmacy, they need to meet all of the requirements of our law.
Well, that doesn't answer the question.
Well, you're asking about a surgery center that doesn't have a pharmacy. By law, a pharmacy, hospital pharmacy or otherwise, has to have a pharmacist. We are not
No, it
referring
doesn't.
to exempt hospitals here. We are talking about hospital pharmacies here.
So you're saying that if a surgery center is associated with a hospital under the hospital license, you're going to require a separate square foot pharmacy in there with all of the restrictions and requirements, and they don't even have a pharmacist. All they want to do is be able to receive prescription drugs at that locations, administer them to patients.
And can't
But
they do that under
for a
the
99-bed or less hospital, you don't have to have a separate pharmacy, and you're not restricted to all those requirements.
Okay, so what we're doing in the law is trying to create an additional option
Right.
for a hospital to have a second pharmacy. If the surgical center does not want to operate as a pharmacy, they are not required to obtain a license.
If a department of the hospital is off-site and under the hospital license and uses prescription drugs, whether you call it a surgery center, a gastroenterology clinic, a dialysis clinic, or many other types of, they need to have prescription drugs, they need to have those to be able to be delivered there by a wholesaler, but they don't need a pharmacy.
How are they doing that now?
They're doing that now by the board issuing an HSP virtual license, where it gets an HSP license, but because there's no physical pharmacy.
That's part of the reason we're trying to clean this up.
Right.
So
So what I'm saying, you still need something to do that. We talked at the board about, well, that would be the same situation as the law allows for a hospital with 100 beds or less to have a drug room license, where they don't have to have a physical pharmacy.
Except they don't have that permit right now. They're not getting that permit, and maybe that's
I
another
agree.
alternative. Maybe that's one way we get at this, but the problem that really addresses, if you remember, really addresses where we had these sterile compounding centers outside the main plant of the hospital, and we couldn't figure out how to deal with them. And we dealt with them initially by giving them a PHY license in that location.
Right.
That only created additional problems. So recognizing that sterile compounding is so important, we wanted to give the flexibility to the hospitals to figure out that if they couldn't do it in the main physical plant, they could break that out and put it in separate locations. Now, you bring up a good point about the clinics that exist not necessarily under the pharmacy's control, but provide patient services and medication in other ways.
Right.
I'm not sure we have an answer for the first question you posed that led to this discussion.
Right.
I think we need to work a little more on that piece.
Yeah,
But
I
this is an
agree.
option for the hospitals. It's not a mandate that they do it. It just gives them another way to address the needs of their physical plant and their patients and their clinics.
So is this something we need to bring back to the licensing committee, or is this something that's going to vet itself out as we go through the statutory process?
The latter, I believe, because again, we've got the general framework of where we're going, and part of the legislative process is that you resolve some of these issues as the matters arise. We're expected to resolve those issues, and for us, it's pretty straightforward. Is it moving us towards our consumer protection mandate, and is it reducing the protections that we've got with our sterile compounding? If it damages either, then we've got a problem. We'll push back and try to find another solution. But I don't know, do you have another response to this? Because to me, this is...
Yeah, so I would say that I'll need to look into the virtual model. I'm not familiar with us doing that. But the proposal does not include drug room currently. That's a policy decision that can be vetted through the legislative process, or you guys can direct us now. But under the current proposal, the exempt hospital, the drug room permit is not included in the proposal.
Do we need, is the notes of this meeting good enough to make sure that we kind of keep this in our scope? Or do we need, some detailed information to come from Dr. Gray or one of the other stakeholders?
I would suggest that we go with the advice and suggestion of our executive officer and move forward with this as it is, and let the process during the development of this legislation help us through this.
Right, but I guess that doesn't answer my question. So my question is, do we want written information back from Dr. Gray?
I think that would be preferable.
Because then I think we'll better understand, we'll make sure that we, hit what your major points are.
Please recognize this is not the first discussion we've had on this. We've had a couple of discussions with Dr. Gray, and then we've had discussions with CDPH. We've had discussions with our attorneys. We've had a number of discussions as this has evolved in order to deal with this. But this, to my knowledge, is the first time I've heard about a virtual hospital pharmacy license.
Well, and my point in bringing that up...
We're not issuing those virtual hospital licenses.
Actually, you have been for 20 years. And we have several facilities, which I did document to you, that are already, one of them has been ordered to give up that license, but then the wholesaler says, if you give up that license, we can't deliver any drugs there. And so it's in limbo right now. But my point is, this proposal doesn't address that problem if you're only talking about places where you have a pharmacist doing sterile compounding. We still have the problem of these departments, whether you call them clinics or whatever, that are under the hospital license, but they're not in the building, they're not even on the same campus, they may be even 15 miles away, but they're under the hospital CDPH license for regulatory purposes. They're not owned and operated by any physician, so they're not using a physician's license, they're using the CDPH license. And in order to receive drugs there, as we understand it, including controlled substances, they have to have a license from the Board of Pharmacy. So heretofore, what the board has done through their supervising inspectors has advised us to apply for a HSP license, recognizing that inside that clinic, there is no square footage that is designated as a pharmacy. They keep the drugs in a cabinet, and that allows them to receive that. This proposal does not address that problem, and that is probably 100 times more prevalent than any such clinic where they're doing sterile compounding. So I think you need to keep that in mind, because if this goes through as is, it doesn't address that problem. We need to modify this.
So I think we're depending on you to help us, through the legislative process, to help us refine this.
Okay, and we'd be happy to participate in that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, there's no pharmacist there.
There's no for most of these, and I'd say 99% of them, there are no pharmacists there. We're talking about dialysis centers that are under the hospital license, which is a common one. We're talking about surgery departments. We're talking about gastro departments where they're doing colonoscopies and conscious sedation. We're talking about a lot of different things that it is up to the hospital to say, we either want this under the CDPH license or we don't want it under the CPDH license. And in some organizations, one hospital say one thing and one hospital say another. And this is prevalent, not just in my organization, but in hospitals throughout, since CDPH started allowing, and the federal government started paying people differently for the same procedure, depending on whether you were under a state hospital license or not under a state hospital license. So, and that's where, when this started to evolve and these happened, we were advised to apply for and receive an HSP license, recognizing that there was no actual pharmacy there or pharmacist. And that's the current situation.
So when the wholesaler delivered the med to the location, who signed for the medicine then? Is the pharmacist supposed to be receiving?
Yeah, and that's part of the issue. But they said as long as it's signed for by who's ever in charge of that, because you'll note that even at a regular hospital, drugs are delivered to the loading dock and people sign for it who are not pharmacists. That's an exemption in the law.
I think what you're hearing here is a case where the law has not kept up with the evolving practice in hospitals, and there have been adaptations made over a period of years, and this is part of what the problem was when we started issuing the sterile compounding licenses. We had nothing to link those to. And what we want to do is to make sure patients get adequate care, but we've got accountability for the records. So what you're seeing here is some of the rough edges rubbing up against each other as we attempt to undo 20 years worth of accommodation.
Well, and it sounds like also we're giving ourselves an opportunity to clean it up.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Do I have any other, thank you very much, Dr. Gray. Is there any other public comment? Thank you.
With respect to Dr. Gray's comments and concerns, I might present a role model which is being used currently, which may be of some interest. When I was the interim pharmacy manager, supervisor 1 at Los Angeles County Department of Health Services, the Lancaster Clinic, the situation was there was a Lancaster clinic, let's say, we'll say maybe it was, call it a hospital, but on the outlying areas, there were other clinics where medical procedures were being processed. So let's say the Acton Clinic in the next town, many miles away, did not have a pharmacy, did not have a pharmacist, but there were physicians doing procedures there, much as what the Kaiser situation may be. How did they handle that? What they had was an automated dispensing machine with the medications at these clinics under the license of, let's say, the hospital, the main hospital, in this case, the Lancaster Clinic. Every morning, we would get deliveries from our wholesaler of the drugs, signed for by the main hospital, the main clinic. Then we have a pharmacy technician, which takes the designated totes to the outlying clinics with the Omnicell and stocks those Omnicells. The personnel at those outlying facilities then can remove medications from the Omnicell under the license of that primary facility. So the deliveries of the medications, as Mr. Gray brought up, is to the main hospital facility, then it's transported to the outlying centers by the licensed pharmacy tech, stocked in those automated dispensing machines, which then keep a record of who, when, and how those medications were dispensed and used. And this is in place now with Los Angeles County Department of Health Services.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? No other board comment? Mr.
So,
Weiser, would you
you
like
know-
to call for the vote?
I would call for the vote. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
All those in favor, please raise your hand of the committee recommendation. Looks like we have a unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the board. So moving on. So we're at D. Discussion and consideration of statutory proposal to establish authority for county emergency medical services providers to use automatic delivery systems for the purpose of restocking ambulances. So as discussed during our December 2016 board meeting, board staff has been meeting periodically with the LA County Fire Department headquarters staff on a proposal to allow the fire department to establish automated drug delivery systems in certain fire stations from which the department's ambulances can restock those ambulances. This system would supplement other methods already in place that permit the restocking of ambulances. The general provisions would be that medications would be owned by LA County Fire and initially purchased and stored centrally in a licensed wholesaler premise, which would be licensed by us and which would be owned and operated by LA Fire Department. Distribution of medications from the wholesaler premises would be to the fire stations with the automatic delivery, drug delivery systems. So a fire station with an ADD, if you will, system would be licensed, requiring a new license type, by the way. Restocking of the automatic drug delivery systems would be under the supervision of a pharmacist. The automated dispensing machines would then be available for access by ambulance staff, where the tracking system from the ADD system would track the signatures of the two staff who removed the medications from the ADD system to replenish the stock medications in the ambulance. So as part of its discussion, we discussed concern about who would have access to the system, as well as its preference to have our preference to have pharmacist involvement. At the conclusion of the discussion, the board referred this matter, wisely, to the licensing committee for further discussion and development of a statutory framework that will provide such a model of restocking ambulance emergency medical supplies and medications for the county. So, the committee discussed a draft statutory proposal, and that should be in attachment number 4. We were advised that the draft was developed based on the board's discussions as well as review of California Emergency Medical Services personnel programs provided by the Emergency Medical Services Authority. As part of the discussion, the committee noted that while the issue was initially brought forward by LA County, the proposal should not be developed for a single county, but rather needed to work for all counties that wish to use this system. The committee provided direction to staff to update the proposal to reflect changes based on our discussion. So we have for you a recommendation pursuant to the statutory changes and to secure addition to BN Business and Professional Code 4034 and the amendment to Business and Professional Code 4119. And once again, I'm going to call upon Ann to point out the changes and to answer any questions that the board may have.
So the proposed Section 4034 is really just defining the system, and we are notating it as different than other automated drug delivery systems, so the name is a little bit different, so we have given it an acronym in 4034 as part of its definition. In 4119, C is where the provisions are contained specifically for the restocking of the ambulance provisions. And so we did try to develop something that could hopefully work for many counties, so there is some flexibility in there, but we did ensure that there is a pharmacist role in the oversight of it, not responsible for day-to-day operations, but working on monthly reviews, sharing responsibility with the county medical officer. So there are policies and procedures that are required. The system needs to have tracking mechanisms to make sure that they know when the machine is accessed, who accesses it. We define who may access the machine, tracking logs, and then the record requirements so that auditing can be done not only by us if we needed to, but also by the designated pharmacist and the medical officer as they see fit. So it's all kind of detailed in there. And then we do have as part of it that if they fail to comply with the requirements of the proposal, that it would constitute unprofessional conduct. We have unprofessional conduct in Business and Professions Code 4301, as well as in some areas of regulation. So we've just added in here to ensure that people understand what the rules are.
Thank you, Ann. So committee, board members, it's the recommendation of the committee that we pursue statutory changes to security addition and 4034 in the amendment and 4119. As I said, it's in your packet in attachment number 4, and I believe that hopefully we have identified a sponsor. An author.
Well, it's still pending, so we just told we sit on that until it's affirmed.
Are there any questions or comments from board members?
So is this going to be at all fire departments? This is the way that they're all going to operate, or is this just for the county?
It is an option to what they're either currently using, or some different counties have different processes in place, but we've been approached by one and now the second largest, probably the 2 largest fire districts in the state that want to use a particular system that's authorized here.
Okay.
Without this, we do not believe the use of these machines in fire departments is authorized.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Public, any questions or comments? Dr. Goldenberg?
Hi, Stan Goldenberg. As I was listening to the challenges of, as Virginia was saying, of understanding all the different sites and current medical practices and trying to get your arms around how you take all of these into considerations as you pass the regulations. We were looking at off-site clinics and dialysis centers, possibly with automatic dispensing systems, fire stations with possible automatic dispensing systems, and long-term care facilities with automatic dispensing systems. The future of healthcare is going to involve a lot of technology, and your technology summit is perfectly timed. And I would ask for you to look at all of these different sites and try to come up with regulations that don't favor one or penalize another, but to focus on the patient, how fast they get the medication, and the challenges of distribution, whether it be traffic or whether it be down the road maybe with some other systems that we've heard about. Thank you very much for this comprehensive approach that you're taking, and I look forward to being at that meeting for your technology summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you. We look forward to your expertise as we go through this legislative process.
Don't be too polite, ladies.
Christine Verskell with Dynalabs. We handle a lot of diversion samples at our company. We receiving much more than we've ever have in the past. And I'm approaching not just first responders, well, I am approaching first responders, and one of the things I get back from them is, can you cite anything that in literature that talks about diversion at the first responder level? And it's probably one of the most fragile areas in terms of diversion. And so I think what you're doing is well-intended, and certainly the cabinets are one solution, but just doing it by county, there's much more out there, I think, that's volatile and that can impact patient safety. So I'm doing what I can to reach out to folks to talk about, if you suspect diversion or if there's missing samples or if things look suspicious to you, to make sure that you have some kind of program in place to address those.
And I think, Mr. Weiser, the committee's intent was with the policies and procedures that are part of this program that we hopefully do at least start with a process, should a diversion issue come up within the area. And I think we did mention counties, but as I remember, those emergency service areas down here are counties because they're large, but in other parts of the state, it's not really counties, it's more
privately,
areas.
yeah. And some hospitals still do it on their own.
What I was going to say, Christine, in response, we also think that the machines provide an added level of security compared to what some of the current methods are for restocking ambulances, which all we want to do is to try to make it easier for the counties that have a particular way they want to proceed to do it legally without just doing it because it's convenient for them.
Deanna Allen, clinical pharmacist again. Going back to Dr. Goldberg's comments about off-site automatic dispensing machines and the Kaiser concerns as well with their surgery centers. One thing about the automatic dispensing machines, they are stocked by licensed pharmacy techs. However, those restocks are all checked and verified by a licensed pharmacist. So there is pharmacy oversight. And if these machines are going to, let's say, a surgery center where a physician is doing, let's say, an outpatient surgery, he is a provider, he has an NPI number, he can pull from those machines without having a remote entry pharmacist verify the order. But if you're thinking of or if anyone or any organization is thinking of putting these automatic dispensing machines in areas where there is no provider, licensed provider, then where's the oversight? So I'm saying that in the model from the Lancaster Clinic, LA County, there was pharmacy oversight all the way from receiving the medications from the wholesaler, signing for them, verifying their inventory, then going through a restock of an Omnicell list to identify what medications are going into that Omnicell, and then we could track what things are being taken out, and they're being taken out by licensed providers.
Debbie, if I may. So under the proposal for this, it does require a pharmacist to stock it as well as complete the monthly inventory reviews. And the only people that have access to this are licensed, whether it's a licensed paramedic that is licensed through EMSA, a pharmacist, or a physician. So there is licensure requirement for access.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, and thank you, Ann. Any other public? I'm not seeing any, so Mr. Weiser, would you like to call for the vote?
Please, Madam Vice President.
Can we call for the vote on the committee recommendation to move this into legislation or statutory? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Looks like we're unanimous. Thank you very much. Would you please continue?
Thank you, and thank you, members of the board. And so to continue, in your packet, you have our licensing statistics, attachment number 5, just to highlight them. The board has received almost 9,300 applications from July 1st, 16 to December 31st, 16. Of which 2,872 were pharmacy techs, 1,759 intern, 1,037 pharmacist exam applications, and 32, underscore it, 32 advanced practice pharmacists. Good for that. As of December 31st, the board has issued 7,098 licenses, renewed 32,478, and has a total of almost 140,000 active licenses. So for the specifics, I will let you enjoy reading that on your own, as well as the days of response. And I would mention, however, that future committee meetings for 2017 include our Pharmacy Technician Summit, not the dispensing machines, but the Pharmacy Technician Summit, which will be on April 4th. The site, it will be at our DCA headquarters at 1625 Market, where the Pharmacy Board is. And our committee meetings for the future, June 29th and September 19th. And if there are no questions, but there is one, that concludes my report.
I do have one question. On the attachment, page 149, pharmacy application. In July, there were 171, but then in August, it increased to 693. Then in September, it has increased to 728. So was that 693 part of the 728 for the previous month, or is that a sharp increase of a whole 700 pharmacy application in a single month?
Well, I suspect I know what it is. There seems to be a certain large pending merger going on out in the pharmacy field. I believe that's what you're looking at there.
Okay, so that's not part of it. It's a whole new 700.
Every month, it's the number of apps we receive.
Okay.
Yeah. So every month, so when you add each one of the columns, you will get a total for the year.
So those are like maybe acquisitions or change?
There's a pending merger going on, or buyout maybe is a better word.
Okay, I got it.
Thank you, Dr. Law.
I'll just throw it out.
That concludes my report. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Mr. Weiser, as always, excellent. I would not expect anything less from you. I would like to point out one thing, or actually two things. Number one is, I know we've spent time in the past looking at the processing time, and so I do want to commend our staff and our executive officer and Ann on the good job of getting our processing time down to where is much more acceptable. I'm sure you probably have these high standards and like to squeeze a little bit more, but I think you've done a good job of managing that.
Well, I think the staff, we actually got some stability, but the sterile compounding implementation was a pretty rough go for a while. So thank you all for your endurance. And Ann's done a lot of work, our staff has done a lot of work.
And I would be
Anyway.
remiss if I didn't thank Ann for her expertise during my presentation.
Anyway,
Ann.
thank you for your leadership, and I'm sure the folks appreciate it. And the second thing is, I do want to just reiterate what Mr. Weiser said and what Dr. Gutierrez said yesterday. We actually have 2 special meetings coming up. One is February 17th, and that's the automatic dispensing machine summit.
Demo.
What is it?
Demo is what I said.
I'm going to call it a summit.
Yeah, it's
And then
better.
also on April 4th is the Pharmacy Technician Summit, and that's to, as Mr. Weiser explained, to look at, the regulations we currently have around pharmacy technicians and, figure out if we need to change anything or what's going on. So please mark those 2 new dates, then those are full board dates. And we really want public and stakeholder input because you guys bring reality to us and help us to make sure that we create regulations and statutes that are appropriate. So with that, we are going to go into a 15-minute recess. I have, that's 11:30, so 11:45. Then we'll come back for the ever exciting legislation regulation report.
Build it up.
And that actually, I think, will then be the end of our agenda today. So one more committee report. Thank you. All ready? Great. Well, he's back there chatting. All right, so our next committee report, I'm trying to stretch it out because you're late. Our next committee report is Leg and Reg, and how much longer do I gotta go? Mr. Lippy, would you please take us through the Leg and Reg report?
I would love to. As soon as I find it.
Yeah.
Take your time, I'm having trouble too.
Well, while we do that, I will tell you who's on the committee. It's chaired by Mr. Lippy, vice chaired by Dr. Butler. Other attendees or members are Dr. Law, Ms. Munoz, and Dr. Wong.
Okay. I'm ready.
Thank you.
Our committee.
Is your mic?
Okay.
Do I get closer to your mouth?
Close enough?
What? Close enough.
Can't hear? Okay. Our committee met yesterday morning at 8 o'clock, and basically all the things we covered were informational, which is what I'm going to be doing today. We did not take any action, any committee action at all. So I'll begin the report. Part 1, legislation for discussion and consideration report. The new legislative session started in December 2016. Since that time, board staff has been monitoring new legislative proposals to be brought to both the committee and board for consideration. Such proposals generally impact either the board jurisdiction or board operations. The deadline to introduce bills is February 17, 2017. Since it's early in the session, only a few measures have been identified, and of those, a few consist of intent language only. Copies of all measures identified in Section B of the report are provided as attachments. Board staff recommends that the committee be aware of the measures, but not recommended that the committee were to be aware of the measures, but not take positions, and that is what we did. We did not take positions. Okay. Next. Board-sponsored legislation. During the October 2016 board meeting, the board voted to pursue a statutory proposal to amend Business and Professions Code Section 4013D1 to include designated reps to the list of individuals required to join board's email notification list. The board staff believes the change would be appropriate for inclusion in an omnibus bill and will be submitting the request to the Senate Business and Profession Committee for consideration. guess we have another report, too. B, legislation impacting the practice of pharmacy or the board's jurisdiction. First one would be AB 12, and this is Administrative Regulations Review, introduced December 5th, 2016, and has not been heard yet in committee. AB 12 would require each state agency to, on or before January 1st, 2020, review regulations, identify any regulations that are duplicative, overlapping, inconsistent, or out of date, to revise those identified regulations as provided and report to the legislature and governor as specified. The bill would repeal the provisions so it sunset January 1st, 2021. Next one is AB 29, introduced by Assemblymember Nazarian on December 5th, 2016. It would state that it is the intent of the legislature to enact legislation related to pharmacy benefits managers, and that's as far as it went. The details are yet to be unfolded. Next is AB 40, Cures Database. AB 40 would require the Department of Justice to make the electronic history of controlled substances dispensed to an individual under a healthcare practitioner's care based on data contained in the Cures Database available to the practitioner through either an online internet web portal or an authorized health information technology system as defined. The bill contains other related provisions and other existing laws. Next bill is SB 17 by Ed Hernandez. SB 17 would state the intent of the legislature to enact legislation requiring public and private purchasers of health care and health care coverage be given advance notice of price increases for the cost of prescription drugs in order to further the ability to predict and manage the costs, and that the public be given information about the justification, if any, for the prices of newly emerging medications and price increases for existing prescription drugs. This bill would include the findings and declarations of the legislature in support of its intent. Next, SB 27 regarding military service. This would require every board within the Department of Consumer Affairs to grant a fee waiver for the application for and the issuance of an initial license to an applicant who supplies satisfactory evidence as defined to the board that the applicant has served as an active duty member of the California National Guard or the United States Armed Forces and was honorably discharged. The bill would require that a veteran be granted only one fee waiver except as specified. Next is SB 70, which would amend existing legislative intent language regarding the legislature's intent to address matters through the Healthcare Professional Disaster Response Act. Next are legislative items for future meeting. This part here was handled by the committee, so we'll move on. I'll ask for it now. Okay, next would be any public comment or any questions thus far? Okay, moving right along. We're up to regulations for discussion and consideration, and I have some supplementary stuff. Okay. This would be regulations adding Title 16 CCR Section 1730, 1730.1, and amending Section 1749 related to advanced practice pharmacists. In July 2015, the board initiated a formal rulemaking to add Title 16 CCR Section 1730, 1730.1, and amend Section 1749 related to the licensing requirements for advanced practice pharmacists. At the August 2016 board meeting, the board adopted the final regulation language. The OAL approved the rulemaking on December 13th, 2016 with an immediate effective date. And you can see the text in attachment 3. Next is board submitted for administrative review to the Department of Consumer Affairs or the Office of Administrative Law. First is proposed regulation to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1744 related to drug warnings. This was approved by the board April 21st, and rulemaking was initiated September 15th. That was April 21st, 2015. Rulemaking was initiated September 25th, 2015, adopted by the board July 27th, 2016, submitted to DCA in August, and submitted to the OAL in December of 16. The amended regulation implements the provisions contained in AB 1136 to include a written warning label and updated the drug classes requiring the written warning label. And you can see that in attachment 4. Next would be proposed regulation to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1707.5 related to patient-centered labels. This regulation modifies the patient-centered labeling requirements, including the term generic 4 on the prescription label. Additionally, the regulation was amended to require that pharmacies have policies and procedures in place to provide translation services to patients with limited or no English proficiency. As part of the committee's discussion, it was noted that manufacturer bottles can be quite small, which makes it challenging to appropriately label as required by the board. As the FDA regulates manufacturers, the committee was advised that the board is not in a position to legislate a change. However, Ms. Harold will send a letter to the manufacturers explaining the challenge and request that manufacturers distribute the medication in large containers. A copy of the adopted text is provided in attachment 5. Next is proposed regulations to amend...
Can you clarify who the letter is being sent to where?
The manufacturer to the FDA.
Do you understand the problem? Oh, okay.
You want to see an example of the problem?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. You probably have an example in your medicine cabinet at home.
I have an example in my bag.
Okay. Next is proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Sections 1732.05, 1732.2, and 1732.5 related to continuing education. The regulation amends board's continuing education requirements. Specifically, the amended regulation grants CE credit for serving on a committee developing the California Practice Standards and Jurisprudence Examination, also known as the CPJE. It grants CE credit for attending board meetings or committee meetings and defines a specialized subject are necessary to meet the CE hour requirements. A copy of adopted text is provided in attachment 6. Next, proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1776 et sequel related to prescription drug take-back. The regulation established the regulatory requirements for prescription drug take-back programs offered by pharmacies, hospitals, clinics with on-site pharmacies, distributors, and reverse distributors licensed by the board. A copy of the text provided in attachment 7. Next is proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1703 related to delegation of certain functions. This regulation updates functions delegated to the executive officer, including the authority to adopt regulation changes that are deemed to be without regulatory effect in accordance with Title I CCR Section 100 and the authority to approve prescription label waivers in accordance with Business Profession Code Section 4076.5D. Copy of the adopted regulation text is in attachment 8.
Let's take a breath. Is there any comments by the board or questions by board members? I just had one question. When we
I had
were
a feeling there was a question.
When we were talking about the CE, you know how we every so often have to grant CE, like for attending the DEA?
Right.
Is there a way that we could maybe, instead of having to ask for that every year, that we could work it into this bill?
Well, at this point, we're at the very end of the CE reg.
Okay,
if
so
you
it's
want
too
us
late.
to do a reg, Because the agendas change a little bit, I don't know.
Okay.
But if you, let me think about it and see if there's something we can do there, so you don't have to see them periodically. I understand.
Well, I mean, it just gives you more flexibility, too.
I appreciate that.
Is there any public comment for this, the section we've gone through, the board adopted, approved by OAL, and the board adopted, submitted to either DCA or OAL? Any of those regulations that were so well-read?
Don't all jump at once.
We have a lot of regs out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Can you please continue?
Yes, I can please continue. Board adopted rulemaking file being prepared by staff for submission and review by the Department of Consumer Affairs or the Office of Administrative Law. Proposed regulation to amend and or add Title 16 CCR Sections 1702, 1702.1, 1702.2, and 1702.5 related to renewal requirements. And before I read what this is about, let me just make a statement. Anybody that has any questions of any of these as I go through, which it seems there really aren't many, please feel free to stand up and come forward as I'm reading it. Thank you. Here we go. This regulation establishes standardized reporting of convictions and discipline at the time of renewal for pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and designated representatives, as well as requires non-resident wholesalers and non-resident pharmacies to report disciplinary actions by other entities at the time of renewal. A copy of the adopted text is provided in attachment 9. Next, our board approved to initiate rulemaking undergoing pre-notice review by the Department of Consumer Affairs or the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. As the board was advised during the October 2016 board meeting, DCA and the agency will now be performing a pre-review of all regulations prior to the board publishing a notice and initiating a comment period. Proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1749 related to the board's fee schedule. This was submitted to DCA for pre-notice review on November 4th, 2016. And the regulation updates the board's fee schedule in regulations to be consistent with updates made to the board's fees in Business and Profession Code Section 4400 as a result of SB 1039. A copy of the approved regulation language is provided in attachment 10. Next is board approved to initiate rulemaking, board staff drafting rulemaking documents for pre-notice review by the Department of Consumer Affairs and Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Sections 1780 to 1783 at sequel related to third-party logistics providers. The regulation establishes the regulatory framework for third-party logistics providers, and the regulation language is provided in attachment 11. Next is proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1793.5 related to the pharmacy technician application, Section 1793.6 related to the pharmacy technician training requirements, and Section 1793.65 in relation to the pharmacy technician certification programs. This was submitted for pre-review on January 23rd, which was 2 days ago. This regulation establishes the training requirements, certification programs, and updates the application for licensure of a pharmacy technician. Board staff is currently compiling the initial rulemaking file to submit to DCA for pre-notice review. The committee discussed the need to review the requirements for a pharmacy technician license and suggested that such requirements need to be strengthened. The committee was advised that the licensing committee will be holding a pharmacy technician summit in April 2017, which was mentioned earlier, and we'll discuss the issue as part of the summit. A copy of the approved regulation language is provided in attachment 12. Proposed regulations to amend Title 16 CCR Section 1735.2 related to the compounding self-assessment form 17M-39. This regulation updates self-assessment form 17M39, which was revised October 16th, as incorporated by reference in 16 CCR section 1735.2. Board staff is currently compiling the initial rulemaking file to submit to DCA for pre-notice review. A copy of the approved regulation, language, and the self-assessment form is provided in attachment 13. Number 4, proposed regulation to amend Title 16 CCR section 1715 and 1784 to update self-assessment forms 17M3, 17M14, and 17-26. Submitted for pre-review on January 20th, 2017. This regulation updates self-assessment form 17M13, which was revised October 16th, 17M14, and 17M26, which were also revised on 10/16. That does not mean 10/16, it means 10 of 2016. As incorporated by reference, board staff is currently compiling the initial rulemaking file to submit to DCA for pre-notice review. A copy of the approved regulation language and the self-assessment forms are provided in attachment 14. Next is proposed regulation to amend Title 16 CCR section 1709 related to trust ownership. This regulation amends the board's regulations regarding ownership to include provisions relating to trust ownership of pharmacies. Board staff is currently compiling the initial rulemaking file to submit to DCA for pre-notice review. A copy of the approved regulation language is provided in attachment 15. That's all of the regulations I'm going to be covering. Are there any questions on anything that I've covered so far or through the rest of the ones I just finished? Okay.
Oh, wait, yes, someone.
Aha. Stanley.
To the third-party logistics, just as an FYI,
Right.
there are some companies that are out there talking about on-site medical waste incineration. The assumption is that's part of the logistics challenge that you're going to be facing. I don't know if you're aware of this. If you're not, I'd be happy to try to have Paige or CCAP send some information to the board about these people to see if it's something you want to get your arms around.
Okay.
Actually, we do, and one of our legislative proposals we approved earlier today was to create a special designated representative for reverse,
Right.
for specifically
Right on
for
top of
reverse
it.
distribution. Well, the issue
Fantastic.
is that the qualifications for a designated rep that exist in law now don't better prepare those companies to operate. Let's give them something they can do. There was just a $40 million medical waste dump up here in Florida by one of the medical waste haulers there, that they were inappropriately treating medical waste. So let's hope that we don't have that happen in California by it showing up in a dump where people can become exposed to it. So we're hoping that this will help. And plus, it keeps the California business vital.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Steve?
Steve Gray, Kaiser Permanente. You are lightning fast today. You are really. Going
Well,
back
we did
to.
stop to take a breath.
Oh, yeah.
Twice.
You must be an opera singer. No, they breathe somehow and keep going. I don't know how they
No,
do that.
I'm practicing to do a commercial for an auto dealer.
I thought it
the
was
fine
for-
print at the
You
bottom.
know, when they tell you all the hidden provisions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was for pharmaceuticals when they say that little asterisk part, but.
That's right.
Under the agenda topic, and it goes back to at the end of your review of the various bills that you know about, there is a section C which says legislative items for future meetings. During this portion of the meeting, the committee may only discuss items to the extent that they determine the measure should be placed on future agenda. Was there anything that you discussed at your legislative meeting, I'm sorry I missed it yesterday, about items that were, pending or late arrivals or anything of that nature?
No,
Okay.
nothing.
And this presumably, I guess, was put on here, and all of this is about state legislation. Does the committee discuss under that category, would the committee discuss pending federal legislation or regulations that affect the practice of pharmacy?
If they actually affect, we actually do, not for taking positions, but for saying if there's any inconsistencies or if federal's working on something that would override something we're working on. But we don't cover all pending federal legislation.
Yeah, I would just suggest that maybe that should be agendized in a way that that could be discussed, because given the current situation, there may be a lot of that happening.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, future meeting dates for the Ledge Reg Committee are April 12th, 2017, June 27th, 2017, and October 18th, 2017. And I may be able to cover all three in one meeting. Thank you for attending, and be careful out there.
Okay, Mr. Lippy, thank you for your report. Just to make sure that it's a new day, is there any other public comment for future meetings or agenda topics? Seeing none, I just will remind you once more that we have two special meetings coming up. One is February 17th, which is about the automatic dispensing machines, and the other one is April 4th, which is our Technician Summit. If there's nothing else, then I think we are adjourned. Thank you.